Hello, folks. Michael again with the CCERP podcast. Here today to talk a little bit about ecology and history with Fred Collins. He's kind enough to join us today. Fred, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I work for Commissioner Raddick here at Kleb Woods Nature Preserve, and also oversee Cypress Top Historic Park, which is another one of Commissioner Raddick's parks in our system here. And I grew up in this area. I grew up in Houston, went to Austin High School, went to Cage Elementary, which was built in 1904. It's on Telephone Road, just south of, or just east of downtown Houston. And when they built it, it was, this big monstrosity out on the prairie. There wasn't anything else out there. And of course, today it's in the shadow of downtown. It's still there, amazingly enough. Amazing old building.
Cool.
But anyway, I was fortunate that even though I grew up on the East End in a small house on a small lot in a little neighborhood over by Austin High School, I did have a lot of opportunities to be out. And Houston was a lot wilder back in those days. Mm-hmm. I wandered over to U of H, and U of H was a little school, and they had a lot of undeveloped property, some of it wooded, and I roamed around that quite a bit. And one of my grandparents had a bay home down in Bay Clifton, so I spent a lot of my youth down roaming along the shoreline of the bay. I developed a genuine interest in nature as a very young child, and in fact, I had a in my backyard flower bed, I had a bird graveyard, and I would take my little red wagon and patrol the streets, and if I found a dead bird, I would bring it home and bury it in the backyard and put a little cross on it. And so I was fascinated with birds from a very young age and cared a great deal about them, and that stuck with me my entire life.
Interesting.
When it was time for me to go to college, I had a tough time deciding whether I wanted to go into biology and study wildlife or whether I wanted to be a historian. But I chose the biology part. The birds was a lot stronger than my interest in history, and so that happened. And then when I came to work eventually for Commissioner Raddick in 2002, all of a sudden I had this wonderful opportunity. I was to develop this nature preserve and nature center, but it also had a historic farm aspect, and so I needed to learn all about the history of the area and how the Kleb family fit into all that.
Cool.
And then eventually we got a hold of Cypress Top Historic Park, which Gene and Delphine Zaborowski donated to Harris County. And that's 8 buildings with the contents, much of which dates back to before 1900. It's just a fabulous collection. Just the breadth of it is really amazing. And so that furthered my ability and necessity to delve into the history of the area. And so I've been very fortunate in having this job, but I've been able to work with wildlife, share that love of wildlife with people, and at the same time share my interest in history with people as well. So it's been a really great job for me, and I could never thank Commissioner Raddick enough for hiring me.
Cool. Nice. Did you ever see any rattlesnakes around when you were younger?
No, I did not. They were pretty much gone from this area by the 1970s, I suppose. My family used to go camping up at Huntsville State Park a couple of times a year with the church group, and on one of those camping trips, a guy came walking in with about a 5-foot timber rattler that he had killed on the trail only a couple of hundred yards away.
Poor snake.
And that was the closest encounter I've had to a timber rattler firsthand, so to speak.
Huh.
But they disappeared early, and they're fairly limited in their distribution in Texas now. To some areas on the Trinity River, and then there's also an interesting area. There's a rock quarry over near Brazos Bend State Park over near Damon, and for some reason there's a lot of timber rattlers in that rock quarry, and from time to time the men over there working find them, and they would let David Bradford know, and he'd come over there and pick it up.
Good.
And take it and release it at Brazos Bend State Park.
Good.
So quite a number of them have been released into Brazos Bend State Park.
Good. Glad they're not being killed. Thank goodness.
In spite of spending a lot of time in proper habitats and looking for them, I've never run across one.
Yeah, it hurts my heart. I've been wanting to get a picture of one on iNaturalist, but not yet to happen.
Yeah, they're pretty hard to come by nowadays. And then there's also the little Masagua here, that pygmy rattlesnake. And I've never run across one of those either. But apparently they still occur in the general area. But they're pretty uncommon to begin with. So I'm not a herpetologist, so I don't go out flipping logs all the time. But
yeah,
they're very difficult to come by.
Any other interesting stories from when you were young? Any animal you came across or anything that was just interesting or formative to you?
Well, one of the things that happened when I was fairly young, I was a teenager, but probably maybe 14, 13, somewhere along there, young teenager. There was I believe it was a coach whip. I can't remember for sure exactly what it was. And it was a big one. It was about 5 feet long.
Wow.
And it had a couple of big lumps in it. And being young kids at that point, this was back in I guess that would have been the very early 60s. Anyway, we killed the snake, and I proceeded to cut it open and find out what was in it. And I had a number of cousins, all of which were girls, and they were just fascinated with me cutting that snake open. And out popped 3 cottontail rabbits.
Whoa!
Baby.
Wow, interesting.
And what's funny is just the other day, my cousin Sherry, and she's 60 years old now, and she said, Fred, I'll still remember that snake you cut off. Cottontails came out of it. So I guess that was my first oh wow moment that I shared some nature with some people that would have never looked at it on their own.
Cool. Yeah, I've got a cousin who told me something I don't remember from when we were young, running around maybe on Luetta before it got more developed. They had some property out there they were staying on decades ago, and he said when he and I were younger, running around out there, junior high school maybe, he said he thought I pointed out a rattlesnake and so kept him from getting bit. I don't remember, but if he says so.
Yeah, I've had more than enough close calls in my life. I'm fortunate I never got bit by any snake.
Yeah, and thankfully
had many close encounters.
Thankfully, they're a lot less aggressive than some people want to imagine or pretend.
Yes, yeah. But we have. I live on a farm, and we have rat snakes that get in the chicken coop periodically, and so when they cause trouble in the chicken coop, we haul them off, and so it happens pretty frequently. They get into stuff and cause trouble. In fact, we had trouble with the dryer, and we called the repairman out to come out and look at the dryer. And he was asking about vent were vented outside, and we went out there, and just as they walked out there, my wife saw this snake tail disappearing up into the dryer vent. And she went, "That's what the problem is." And she reached over and grabbed this rat snake, and she pulled it out of that vent. And it was about a 6 foot long rat snake.
Wow.
And she turned around to this repairman and says, "Come over here and help me." And he got up there, and he was perched up in his truck, and he says, "Ma'am, I don't do snakes."
That's funny. Good for her. Wow. Pretty cool.
But anyway, we haul these snakes off all the time, and so we had one just the other day, and gave it to my wife, and she was going to haul it off on the way up to College Station, and we'd done this a bunch, and anyway, so she got out there, and she stopped on the side of the road, and the snake didn't want to come out. And usually they'll just crawl out, no problem.
I like y'all. I want to stay with y'all.
Threw that snake out. Well, first off, she pulled the lid off, and it started hissing at her. And they never do that. And then she threw it out there, and it hissed at her again, and picked up and came right back at her. And she sidestepped out of the way and went back up under the truck. And she went, "Oh my God!" Got in the truck and drove off.
Interesting.
So every once in a while, one of them does something strange.
Yeah, it's one good thing about biology. Always more to learn. Not like calculus, which is always predictable.
Yeah. You just never know for sure what an animal going to do in any given situation.
Especially a human.
Yes, exactly.
As Steve Irwin said, "I'd rather be around wild animals than most people any day."
Well, even though they're unpredictable, they're a lot more predictable than people most of the time.
Yeah, some people are great. I love them, but history shows not all of them are.
Yeah.
But cool. Yeah, I like that. Snakes are important. Story I like to tell is about something I read in a book. I forgot which one. There's Scribe Vineyards out in California, and two brothers own it. And one would ride around on his horse. And of course, following convention, think, what does everyone do? I mean, everyone knows snakes are bad and you should just kill them. And so he's killing rattlesnakes. And then after a while, they notice that they don't have as many grapes, and the grapevines are suffering. And it's like, what? Then they figure out, oh, the gophers are eating the roots and undercutting the grapevines. And instead of being like some people and poisoning the gophers, kill the snakes, poison the gophers. He grasped the connection. There's more gophers because of what I did. It's my fault for killing the snakes, because the rattlesnakes are the only thing, or one of the only things, that can go into a gopher den and get them. So killing the snakes was actually undercutting his profit, undercutting his ability to save for their kids' education and stuff like that.
Yep. And of course, the gophers aerate the soil as well, so it's all connected.
Yeah,
you got to have something. You have to have some all of that to make it work right.
Yeah. And then rattlesnakes have to have something to eat. But cool. So, do you got? How far did you go in your biology? Bachelor's, master's, PhD?
I was working. I went to graduate school at A&M and worked on a master's degree. I caught snipe, and we studied the wintering population of snipe in the central Brazos Valley. Not too many people can work their way through college catching snipe.
Cool.
But anyway, I was working on my master's degree and finished everything up, finished my research up and all the classwork. But I never did actually write my thesis, and so I never got a master's degree. I got sidetracked by my family and came to Houston to help out in the family business for a little while. A little while turned into 18 years. Yeah. And then I eventually got back into biology, and I was considering going back to school, and then I got an offer to operate to be the director of the Nature Discovery Center down in Bel Air. And I needed a job, and and they needed somebody that knew something about business as well as somebody that knew something about nature.
Cool.
So it was a good fit, and it turned out to be a good thing for me. And
good.
So I worked there for 8 years before Commissioner Raddick hired me to build out and open up Kleb Woods Nature Preserve.
So what can you tell us about Kleb? Can you tell us about Kleb and what it offers and the programs?
We have a variety of programs, and we have a series of classes that we call Closer Look at Nature and Closer Look at History, which are targeted for young children or elementary age children. And we primarily cater to homeschoolers. That turns out to be the niche that we filled. And so we have a huge number of homeschooler people that come and attend those classes. We also have bird watching every Wednesday. Have a bird walk every Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
We have plant walks about once a month.
Cool.
We also have a history discussion group that meets once a month out here.
Cool.
And we typically review books. The one we did this past week was about the Navajo code talkers during World War II.
Oh yeah, I've listened to that book. Cool.
So we just have a pretty good variety of things. We have bus trips for seniors, and one of them is a birding bus trip. We do that every month at a club, and we go to various places in southeast Texas. The one coming up, we're going to go to Atwater Prairie Chicken Refuge,
mm-hmm.
and then we have a history bus trip that we operate out of Cypress Top. In this past month, we went down to Galveston. One of the employees here in Precinct 3 is a man named Santos Cruz, and his father, Santos Cruz Sr., was the head bartender for the Maceo family in Galveston. And so, do you know who that is?
No, I was going to ask.
The Maceos were the Galveston mob, and they were formidable and they were well known across the country. Elliot Ness, Al Capone sent one of his lieutenants down here in the 30s to see if he could make a deal with the Maceos. And Rose Maceo, who was the enforcer of the Maceo family, escorted him back to Houston and put him on a train and sent him back to New York.
Huh, wow.
But anyway,
dang, that's powerful.
Santos grew up hearing all these families about the Maceo family, and his dad running all the bars for him, knew all about all that stuff. And so the people that went on that tour got a very interesting and uncommon look at the city of Galveston and everything that was involved about its history. So
cool, interesting.
A lot of people don't realize it, but before Las Vegas, Galveston was kind of the entertainment and gambling mecca in the United States.
Huh.
It was a really major thing, but it all ended in the 1950s, and Las Vegas opened about the same time. So.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. I knew that, like, for example, way back in the day, New Orleans was the art capital of the world. That's where the U.S. That's where people in the U.S. would go to see some of the best theater, opera, or at least in the West, if not the whole U.S.
The Houston-Galveston area is really interesting. It's had a remarkable place in history across the country that it's just been lost. Just like this Maceo family and the gambling syndicate that was operating in Galveston for so many years, and it was a first-class operation. I mean, it was all the big Hollywood people. Came to Galveston all the time. The Maceos were close personal friends of Frank Sinatra, and I mean, it was the place to be. And then there's a couple of other obscure things that people don't realize about this area. Is Houston once upon a time was the fig capital of the world.
Really? Huh.
And everybody was growing fig trees, and they would ship these figs all over the country, and they would put them on the train and ship them to New York, and they would sell them in New York. And so exporting figs out of this part of the Gulf Coast was just a big deal, and it was centered in Houston. And one of my great grandmothers, she lived in Pasadena, and they lived. She had a little house in Pasadena, but it was on a long, skinny lot, and they had like 2 or 3 acres, and they had about 2 acres in strawberries, and she grew strawberries all the time. That was one of their major. My great grandfather, he was a conductor for a trolley car that ran from Pasadena to Houston, and she grew strawberries all the time, and that was what their income was. But Pasadena was the strawberry capital of the world.
Huh. Wow.
And then once upon a time, people really liked turtle soup, and that was one of the things that people liked was turtle soup. Mm-hmm. Well, Galveston has this diamondback terrapin. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're a beautiful little turtle, and they're not real big. They're about, if you put your hands out and cup them and open them up little bits, so these turtles are about 8 to 10 inches, and they're pretty thick, and they're just a beautiful turtle. They live in the bay, and those turtles form the basis for this turtle soup industry. And there was canning plants on Galveston, several of them, that were in the business of making turtle soup, canning it, and shipping it all over the world. And it was a big deal once upon a time. So it's funny how these different things happened, and today people don't even realize that, people will never associate figs with Houston, and nor would they associate turtle soup with Galveston. So,
what kind of terrapin was it?
It's a diamondback terrapin, and they've recovered. Of course, they just about annihilated them with this turtle soup industry, but they've come back, and they're relatively common again. But there's a big Asian population in Houston today, and they like turtle soup, and so I don't know if you noticed that. There was always turtles crossing the road. Remember? Mm-hmm. Driving around here in the 1970s, you drove out in the country, and there were turtles all over the road, and people would stop and pick them up and move them off the side of the road and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Every once in a while, somebody would be ugly, and they would put one up on a post, on a fence post. Yeah. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. But anyway, so, you don't see turtles like that anymore. Well, it turns out what happened is Houston got this big burgeoning population of Asians. It was the Vietnamese first, and then some others have come in more recently after the Vietnam War. There's been an influx of other recent immigrant Asians, and they like turtles. And of course, a lot of them are involved in the import trade, bringing stuff from China into Houston and selling it. And they have all these empty shipping containers for shipping back to China. Somebody had the bright idea, hey, we can fill it up with turtles. And so they started collecting turtles and putting them in these containers. And it turns out that the turtle population was pretty much crashing here in Texas. And it was all because there were so many people picking them up and putting them in their shipping containers and shipping them back to China. And so Texas Parks and Wildlife figured all this out, and they got the legislator to pass this law, and the legislator passed this law that, you couldn't pick up a turtle. Well, actually what the law was that if a game warden saw you stop and pick up a turtle and move it across to the other side of the road, you could be arrested. So anyway, they had to fix the law, and they fixed it in this last legislative session. But that's one of the reasons that you don't see. It wasn't so much an environmental crisis as it was an over harvesting crisis from of an unregulated form of wildlife, so to speak. So people always cause complications, but we don't realize how many people there are. There's 5 million people in Harris County alone. And in this area, there's probably closer to twice that many people. And, it doesn't take very many, you just look at 1/10 of that population, and if it's Asian, and then 1/10 of those involved in this, this casual collecting turtle thing, well, all of a sudden, you got 100,000 people out there picking up turtles. And they can pick up a lot of turtles.
Yeah, maybe some backcountry people from Georgia or Alabama, but they're going to tend to stay where they are. They're not going to be moving around much.
What?
Maybe some backcountry people from Alabama or Georgia could come over and pick up turtles, but if they're backcountry, they're going to stay where they are.
But anyway, it's just amazing when there's as many people out there as there are today. Very minor things can have a huge effect on animal population, and I don't think that's something that really needs to sink in. It's this idea of I just have this one piece of litter. Well, there's 10 million people. If they all have one piece of litter, you got a lot of litter.
Yeah, I was just out.
So just the act, everybody's individual action can have a really big impact on the quality of our environment.
I was out this morning. I pick up trash most every time I'm out. I was picking some up, and I thought, if everyone, I had thought this before, and I was thinking again, if everyone would just pick up one piece of trash when they're out, how much cleaner the area would be. Just one piece.
That's exactly right.
That'd be
you pick
thousands
up one thing
of
off the ground, and you've made a big impact.
Yeah.
And likewise, if you put something on the ground, you've made a big impact.
Yeah.
You can have a positive or a negative effect on the circumstance.
Yeah, true. What do you want to be like in the world? Do you want to make the world better or not? It's like
And it's such little things that people don't really think it's important. If somebody picks up a turtle because they want it, well, that's not a big deal. But the problem is that there's 1 million people that want that turtle.
Yeah,
and that's a problem.
And the Grand Canyon is a good thing for that. The Grand Canyon wasn't caused by some big short-term event, or wasn't caused by someone dragging an axe one day across the land, Paul Bunyan. It was caused by one little grain of sand hitting some rock for 1 second, repeated over and over and over again many, many times.
Yeah, a little bit of water can go a long way.
Yeah, it's an integration of many small forces.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, on the history program there, you got at Kleb. What other books have y'all read besides the Code Talkers?
Well, I've been doing this. We do one every month, and I've been doing this for 12 years. So 140 books.
Cool.
I don't think I can even think about naming them all. I'll turn around here and look at some of them behind me. A lot of the people that attend these history discussion groups are retired people, and most people of that age, their parents were involved in World War II. So World War II is a popular topic, and just recently we've done Dick Cole's War. Dick Cole was the co-pilot of Jimmy Doolittle on that April bombing raid into Tokyo. And we reviewed Killing the Rising Sun by Bill O'Reilly. That series of books is very interesting. Even if you don't like Bill O'Reilly, it's an interesting set of books. We did The Storm on Our Shores, which is about the Aleutian Islands being invaded and occupied by the Japanese during World War II. Most people don't know about that. And we did a book called Torpedoes in the Gulf, which is about the German U-boats that operated in the Gulf of Mexico during World War II. And they were right off the Galveston. We've done a lot of books about some of our founding fathers. There's an interesting book called Faith of Our Fathers, and it talks about the religious views of our founding fathers. There's an interesting book that's fairly new out called Young Washington, and it's about the early years of Washington's life.
Cool.
Most people don't realize that George Washington is a young lieutenant leading a group of primarily Native Americans that were primarily going against the French and some other Native Americans. One of these chiefs killed somebody he wasn't supposed to kill, and Washington responded to all that, and in the process started the French-Indian War.
Wow.
There's a book called Scratch of the Pen, and it's about the treaty that ended the French-Indian War in 1763. And in that treaty, more real estate changed hands than happened at any other time on the face of the earth. And that was all because of George Washington.
Wow.
So, and we did, there's another book called George Washington's Secret Six, and that's about 6 different spies that George Washington had during the Revolutionary War that were instrumental into keeping him out of trouble. And a very interesting book. Here again, very, very poorly known. We also have done some things. One of the books that had a big impact on me was The American Plague, and that's the story of yellow fever in the United States. And then there's another book that's become very popular again lately, John Barry's The Great Influenza. We did that book about, 6 years ago or something, and we did it again here just recently because of the pandemic situation we're in and the lessons to be learned out of that book. So, we also do a lot of books about Texas history. I'm a big Texas history buff, and so we do a lot of Texas stuff as well.
Cool.
And one of the books that I find very interesting is a book called Jeff Davis's Own. And of course, most people know Jeff Davis is the president of the Confederacy, but he was so much more than that. And he was the Secretary of the War for the United States in the 1850s. And the military in the United States was kind of a mess in that time period because it was all based on seniority and nepotism.
Yeah.
And he was the Secretary of War, and he saw the problem with that. And he convinced Congress to create a new Army division, and he stuck it out in Texas, and he put all these young cadets out of the military academy based on their abilities, not on who they were, and put them in this division, and they had a series of forts out across the West to protect the frontier. Well, about 10 years later, the Civil War broke out. And some of those men that had served together under Jeff Davis were every major general you can name in the Confederacy, including Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant. And they had all been together and learned and worked together out in Texas in the 1850s. So that's a very interesting book. Anyway, that's what we do in our history discussion group.
What about the bird group?
What about what?
The bird group on Wednesdays?
Well, that's just a bird walk on Wednesday, although we also do, I didn't mention, we also do a birder, we do a birding program also on selected Wednesdays. And over the years, we've done all sorts of different things. We frequently do some type of identification workshop where we'll talk about, for instance, sparrows, or we'll talk about ducks or hawks or warblers, and help people learn to identify those. We frequently borrow specimens from the biodiversity research collection at Texas A&M University so that we can show all these different specimens so that people can see in their hand and up close some of these characters that they're looking for in the field. Sometimes those workshops will involve a field trip. We had one this past January before everything fell apart. And there's a fellow named Sinti Lee. I don't know if you've heard of him or not.
Don't think so.
Or excuse me, yeah, that's right, Sinti Lee. Anyway, he's a professor at Rice University. And he's also a great bird watcher and a great bird artist, although he's a geochemist, and he does that sort of stuff professionally. But he's into bird watching, and he actually teaches a bird watching course for students at Rice.
Cool.
But anyway, he's an extremely good bird watcher, and he is extremely good with gulls, which are probably the most difficult group of birds to identify. I've been bird watching for 50 years, and I still don't know gulls that well. They just take a lot more attention that I'm willing to give them sometimes. But at any rate, Sintai, he led this field trip for us, and we all gathered out there, and it was over in Fort Bend County near the garbage dump out there, because dumps attract gulls, and then there's a lake right there, and so these gulls come and sit on the lake. And they went out there, and he would put the scope on a bird and tell people what to look for and that sort of stuff.
Cool.
So sometimes our field trips might be like that for these classes. We also have done something like that for hummingbird, where we'll take a group of people to some local private residents that have a lot of hummingbirds, and we would show these people these birds and talk about how you recognize this and what to look for and all sorts of stuff like that.
Cool.
So, and then sometimes we have some that are not necessarily identification related. We had one of the ladies here, Kendra Kokab, she's a fine young birder, and she would give a program on how to use your iPhone with these different birding applications. There's something called eBird, which is very similar to iNaturalist, only it's different. And eBird is a great tool for bird watchers, and the information is part of a national database that's become absolutely huge. Are you familiar with eBird?
Yeah, I don't use it much. I'm big on iNaturalist.
Okay.
I got the app.
Yeah.
I need to use eBird more.
Yeah, if you go to the Cornell website and start looking at the information that they have developed based on all these sightings that people put in, it's most impressive, and it's probably the greatest conservation tool that's been created in the last 50 years, I bet. It's just phenomenal. So anyway, we do this program and teach people how to use that bird app and other bird apps. There's all sorts of identification apps and song apps and all this stuff that are available for your phone. So that the phone is a very integral part of bird watching today.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we have a different variety of programs like that. On our field trips that we do, on our birding field trips, we try and go and find some birds that people can't always find on their own. For instance, on this field trip we're going to do to Outwater, a lot of people that are bird watchers and have been bird watching for a while, they always have trouble with sparrows, but they learn some of the sparrows, but then they realize that they've never seen maybe grasshopper or conch, Nelson sparrow, maybe seaside sparrow, Henslow sparrow. There's a few sparrows that stay in the tall grass and they don't perch up too often. And so they take some special knowledge and abilities to find those species. And so this trip to Outwater, they're going to concentrate on those species. It's birds that most people are not able to find on their own.
Oh, cool.
We also take a field trip most years up to Boykin Springs up in Jasper County. And there we get Bogman sparrow, which is, again, a very unique sparrow in a very limited habitat. And you have to know exactly where to go and when and what to listen for in order to find that sparrow. And so we go and take a trip up there. We usually go to Williamson County every winter and look for mountain plover. And mountain plover is a bird that most people have not seen, and it's a bird that you probably can't find on your own, and so you need help. And so we go out to Williamson County and show people mountain plover and often longspurs, which are also difficult birds for people to find. So,
and that's plover with a P, not with a C.
Yes, plover, P-L-O-V-E. And then we also usually go over into the Austin or San Antonio area once a year in the spring to see golden cheek warbler.
Cool. And then anything else you can say too?
Yeah, sure. You'll see lots of other birds, but we usually often have we try and go after these target birds because most of the bird watchers you meet, as you're talking to people, they haven't seen most of those species that I just talked about, even though they're fairly close and available. It's just that you have to have special knowledge or technique in order to find them. Mm-hmm. And so we help people do that.
Cool. What kind
and
of
then
birds?
Also in the process of going on all these field trips, people learn all the cool places to go around here so they can go off on their own and do it. So.
Yeah, cool. Nice. What kind of birds do you see there at Kleb?
We have mostly woodland bird species here. This place is interesting. The Klebs, this was part of the Katy Prairie, and so originally it was just all prairie grass, virtually no trees, and the Klebs turned it into a farm, and they farmed it between the 1870s and about 1980 something, and or ran cattle on it, one or the other, or both. But anyway, it was farmed. They had 60 acres, or 30 acres was in crops, and in 1947, the government told Elmer's father, Ed Kleb, who was the only person the government knew lived here, that for him to go ahead and take this land out of production. They had control of production in the 1930s during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. And then when the war broke out, they told them to produce any and everything that they could. And then after the war ended, they started going back in and controlling stuff. And Ed Kleb was over 70 years old at that time, and so they told him to take his land out of production. And so in a German tradition, he planted trees in his cropland and also in a 30-acre pasture up in the north. So he planted 60 acres of pine trees And the idea was that this grove of pine trees would take care of Elmer, provide him income in his old age. Of course, Elmer loved trees. Growing up on the prairie, he really liked trees, and so he grew trees everywhere he had a chance. And he wasn't about to let anything happen to all these big, beautiful pine trees. And so instead of harvesting them, he hung on, was stubborn, and as it turned out, he got foreclosed on because he was destitute and couldn't pay his taxes. And they were going to evict him, and then the Houston Audubon Society found out about it, started working with people, and first thing you know, eventually they made arrangements for Commissioner Raddick to purchase the property as parkland, or as a wildlife refuge, rather, not as parkland, but as a wildlife habitat with money from Texas Parks and Wildlife. So the county purchased the property and developed it, and it's all dedicated for wildlife habitat. And Elmer lived out his life here, and he died in 1999. And after that, the county put out a contract for a master plan, and the master plan was developed. And I was hired in 2002 to execute the master plan. And we built the park and opened it in 2006.
How many acres do you have?
It's 130 acres, and it's now virtually all wooded. And we have a lot of piney woods birds here, including brown-headed nuthatch. And we have a fair variety of sparrows, mostly chipping sparrows and white-throated sparrows, but we also have swamp sparrows and song sparrows and Lincoln sparrows and field sparrows and white-crowned sparrows and an occasional Harris sparrow in the winter. And pine warblers are very common here all year round. They nest here. Ruby's red hummingbird nest here, and we have a big influx of hummingbirds in migration. And hence we started having a hummingbird festival about 2008, and held it most years since then. We've had to cancel it a couple of times, once because of COVID and once because of a hurricane. But and that hummingbird festival attracts about 1,500 people nowadays, so it gets pretty crowded out here on that day.
So all the land used to be prairie?
Yeah, the land used to be all prairie, but today it's pretty much all wooded, yes.
Was there any plan to make part of it prairie, to restore it to prairie, or keep it all woods, or what?
We have a small prairie remnant, but the culture and history of this property is Elmer's Woods, and so we try and maintain the pines here, which takes some effort because it's just overrun with yaupons, and trees won't reproduce under yaupon, and so it's kind of a continual process to keep trying to get the yaupon off and plant more pine trees. And oak trees come up on their own, and so it's evolving into a typical East Texas, southeast woodland habitat. And we've planted some other species in here with Eagle Scout projects and whatnot. We've planted some of the native trees that were native to this area, or native just on the other side of Spring Creek a mile away. So it's becoming more diverse all the time, and wildlife's responding it. So we've had about 240 species of birds listed here, and we still have bobcat and gray fox here.
Awesome, beautiful.
Along with all the smaller mammals that you'd expect.
Cool. Coyote?
Yeah, coyotes are everyone.
It's their nature. And so, because of the way you have the place, to keep the pines, you wouldn't want to have any controlled burns?
Well, I would love to be able to do some controlled burns, but 130 acres is not very big. And the southern section is a 100-acre rectangle, or more or less square. But there's a 30-acre panhandle, which is a very narrow, long piece of property, and it's got cow pasture on one side, and it's got warehouses and houses on the other side. And so So, and doing a control burn here would probably be a lot more difficult than it's worth. We're working on the prairie remnant, using a lot of using mowing, and then we have master naturalists that come out and help us control yaupon and things. Cool. We have a volunteer group that meets on Mondays during the winter, and I call them the yaupon's worst nightmare group. And we go in and we move yaupon off of trees so that the trees are more healthy, more drought resistant. And then some of these areas that have had tree falls, it's just this mass of vine and yaupon. We go in and clean that completely out, and then I'll use that area to some kind of service project. A group will come in and plant trees. These classes I referred to earlier that we have a closer look at nature and closer look at history classes, we often tie that into something where the activity would be for the kids to transplant young pine trees into a new area that we just cleared. Or they might plant bluebonnet seeds as a project. But anyways, one of the activities for the class will do something that's part of that conservation effort for the property. And that way these kids get a little bit more tied into the whole system.
Cool. What do you do to get rid of the yaupon? You just cut it down at the root? Do you got to poison it or what?
Well, what we typically do is we just go in and cut it off at the ground, and then I'll typically mow those areas for a period of time. And for instance, 2 or 3 years I'll mow them with our county mow crew, and they come out every week and mow, and we'll just have them mow those areas, and that'll kill that yaupon off in a couple of years without the need of using any herbicide or anything.
Oh, cool.
And then we'll plant those trees in there and continue to mow around the trees. And once the trees kind of get plenty big enough, then we'll quit mowing it, and it'll become more of a natural forest again.
Cool.
And then there's some areas that we just mow we have some clearings and we mow them once or twice a year. And that keeps the yaupon down so that it's good food for deer and it doesn't cause too much trouble. And we don't have to use herbicide. Every once in a while, we'll have to resort to herbicide for some individual plants for some specific place, but typically we're able to keep it down mechanically and not have to do that.
Good. So you're about a mile from Spring Creek. What about Willow Creek and Little Cypress?
Willow Creek, the water, well, let me start from the beginning. We're lots of stories tying together here.
Cool.
2920 runs more or less parallel to Spring Creek. And 2920, that's where it goes between Waller and Tomball. And of course, before it was the Waller-Tomball Road, it was the Atascocita Trail. And before it was the Atascocita Trail, it was an Indian Trail. And before it was an Indian Trail, it was the natural flood levee of Spring Creek. And if you drive between Waller and Tomball, you don't hardly pass over a culvert that entire distance because it's this old flood levee, this geologic flood levee of Spring Creek. And, I'm sure that mastodons and ground sloths and bison and all these prehistoric animals that were roaming the prairie use that same flood levee as pathway. So it's just this natural pathway, and it's the high point, so to speak, in the county. And because there's no, we're in 2920 runs right at the doorstep of our north track.
Mm-hmm.
And so consequently, there's no watershed of any sort in or close to Kleb Woods. And it's a sheet flow when it rains, and 6 inches of rain, there's 6 inches of water running across the property, all across it. But there's a swale down on the bottom of the 100 acres, and that swale goes from one swale to another swale, and the Klebs modified one of those swales in the 1940s and created a pond that we call Myrtle's Pool. And they put in kind of a levee, and it ran this swale across the south end of the property. And you can follow a 1916 geologic survey map and see the swale goes down across 100 acres south of us, which flood control recently plowed, and they're digging a retention pond there. Be a nice buffer for the park on the south side. But anyway, this swale ran across that property, and it ran across what's now Muskie Road, and somewhere about there, it began to be called Willow Creek. So basically, Kleb is the head water of Willow Creek. But that's the only watershed that's near here. This country was. It's possible that Cabeza de Vaca may have come up here and traded with the Acaquistas after he had been in captivity for several years and became a medicine man. And it's possible that he was up to the east of here, but nobody knows exactly where he was because he had no way of knowing where it was.
Yeah.
And so it's all speculation exactly where he was. But anyway, the woods were closely defined and near Spring Creek. And there's a huge amount of Native American artifacts along Spring Creek. It had a long history of occupation. But below that, there's not a whole lot of anything. At that Diamond Mound site where 99 found that ancient burial that's probably 9,000 years old, maybe. It's very old, older than all the Native American tribes in this area. But at any rate, there was some settlement there. But from that levee along Spring Creek all the way down to the Brazos River and to Buffalo Bayou was all a huge plain of grass. Okay. Today we call what's left of it the Katy Prairie, but it stretched all the way east over to Houston, to White Oak Bayou, and Buffalo Bayou and White Oak had fairly narrow riparian corridors along. So almost all of this was just this unbroken plain of grass, and the creeks that crossed there would have these little narrow bands of trees on them, but otherwise it was just all this big area of grass. And there was a Frenchman named Biologist, and he got shipwrecked in about 1719, and he was up there somewhere near Anahuac and got taken in by some Native Americans over there, probably some Acaquistas, and he eventually made it back to France, and he wrote this story of what happened to him in all that time period. But he describes that this tribe he was with left over there, and they came across, they came all the way across to the opposite side of Galveston Bay and crossed two streams, one of which they think was White Oak Bayou, and ended up out here north of Buffalo Bayou on the Katy Prairie, right here in the Cypress area. And they were hunting buffalo. And all these Native Americans would come from everywhere, and they would come up here onto the Katy Prairie and hunt buffalo in the fall. And so he describes that episode of and describes how beautiful it was and how fertile the land had to be because this grass was just so luxurious and so tall. And that they hunted buffalo for several days, and there were a lot of buffalo here. And so that's what this place looked like. And of course, probably the coast stabilized about 50,000 years ago, and that same plain was probably there for almost that entire time period. The sea level was a little lower, and so that would have made the riparian quarters probably a little bit narrower than they were today. So it may have made the plain a little bit more extensive. But that same plain, prior to humans reaching the North American continent 14,000 years ago, would have been covered with camel and horses and mammoths and mastodons and giant ground sloths and Shasta's ground sloths and probably American cheetahs and American lions, dire wolves, all that stuff was probably right here. And it left very little trace. Of course, they have found a few things along the way. They found some mammoths and mastodons both along Spring Creek, and Brays Bayou, and there's on Buffalo Bayou, they have a giant ground sloth from up there. And so all these animals were here in this entire area.
Cool.
When my friend John Tweeton was a great naturalist, and one of his favorite things to do was go down after rains and search along the Texas City Dike on the bayside, because they had dredged that stuff right off of the edge of it and piled it up to make the levee during the war, I think, or in the 30s, somewhere along in there. And so it was all dredged up right there next to it and piled up, and it would erode out. And he loved to go down there and collect fossils, and he had found horse and sheep and mastodon fossils all right there on the Texas City Dike. So these animals were all very common. And of course, this area was all pretty much grassland at that point in time. Although mastodons were browsers and not grazers, the mammoths were the grazers. But so,
tell folks what's the difference.
The landscape would look completely different. And these just like the elephants today in Africa, the elephants push over these trees on the savannas, and they just more or less destroy all the trees in the savannas, and that keeps it open and keeps it grassland. So here again, they're a key component for the savanna, because they keep all these browsers keep the brush from invading. And of course, we don't have that sort of activity now. And so the Katy Prairie, the biggest problem in Katy Prairie has all the brushy species coming in and moving into it, including Chinese tallow and weesach and mesquite and bacchus and all this stuff. It just tends to get brushy instead of remaining open. And because there's none of these big browsers and there's no fire, combination of those two things. You can't keep a prairie without fire and something to control the brush.
What's the difference between a browser and a grazer?
A grazer eats grass, and a browser eats shrubs and trees and things like that.
Yeah. So, what are some examples of browsers and some examples of grazers?
Goats are browsers, and sheep are grazers, for instance. And horse are primarily grazers. White-tailed deer are browsers. But interestingly enough, there was a lot of white-tailed deer on the prairies prior to 1830 or prior to 1850 in Texas. There's a fellow named Gideon Winsicom, and he wrote several books, very, very interesting character. But he was one of the early naturalists in Texas, and he was here in the 1830s, and he had come into Texas originally, I think in 1832, and had traveled around the state, and he wrote about things he saw and whatnot, and you know, we're still kind of arguing about what he might have seen where, but he may have seen passenger pigeons in Austin. He apparently saw large numbers of trumpeter swans in Texas. Some of the earlier reports say that Galveston Bay in the 1850s would be covered with trumpeter swans in the winter.
Huh.
So Galveston Bay, once upon a time, had a huge amount of grass in the beds, grass beds in the bay, just acres and acres and acres of them. And those beds keep that water just crystal clear. But swans that's exactly the kind of habitat that swans like. And canvasback, there must have been millions upon millions of canvasback. But those we've lost most of those grass beds, and they were lost primarily because they removed all the oyster beds. In the process of doing that, they increased the turbidity of the water. The grass died, and it's dead. It's too turbid for it to come back very well, and so it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. But once you lose it, it's hard to get it back. So when those oyster shells were dredged, and at the same time they were dredging those oyster shells in the 1950s and 1960s, they were also pumping a lot of oil and water out of the ground, causing some sightings, and the combination of those things turned out to be deadly for the bay, for the bay's grass beds, and so they're just nothing compared to what they once were.
It's too bad. There goes our food.
Yeah, it would have been something to see that. One year in my youth, the eelgrass flourished in Trinity Bay, and for about I don't know what caused all of that, but for about a year, I guess maybe 2 years, the water down there was crystal clear, but there was grass everywhere, so it wasn't very fun to swim in. We'd get in the boat, propellers and everything, but the water was just clear as glass, and you could see fish everywhere, and it was just beautiful.
Nice. What was the name of that Frenchman in 1719?
Bellis, Bellise, I believe is how you spell it. And his story was published in the Southwestern Quarterly, I think, in 1940. And I've read it several times. It's a very interesting account. These Native Americans he was with wouldn't. They kept him naked all the time, and he was their slave. And they got ready to go on this hunt, and they gave him all this stuff to carry, and they told him to come along and follow. And they were all on horseback, and they took off. And of course, he was worried about if he couldn't follow him, he was going to starve to death, or no telling what. And so, with great difficulty and effort, he finally made it over here. And when he did, all of a sudden they had these buffalo, and they had plenty to eat, and they were all very jovial and happy and very nice to him. But they weren't so nice to him when they left.
Yeah.
Pick up that stuff and come on, or we're leaving you.
What else did he report? What did he have to say in his account?
Well, those are kind of the high points that I can recall right now.
Yeah. How did his...
It's an interesting story. If you haven't read it and you would like to read it, I can send you, I think I have the PDF file.
Oh, sweet, yeah. That'd be nice.
Yeah,
otherwise, I just look it up on the internet, but
fun,
yeah.
Cool. Fun story, yeah.
Interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, actually, it's probably, if you look it up, you could look it up in the Texas Handbook. I think it's in there.
Huh.
His story's in there, and it's not the entire article. And The article's in another place on the. Yeah, you could find it all just looking in the Handbook of Texas.
Okay, cool. I'll make a note of that.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, it's a great account. And have you read Cabeza de Vaca's account?
Yeah, I've listened on Audible to a few biographies about him and listened to his account. And
yeah,
cool.
What's so frustrating about him is that he never knew where he was.
Yeah.
And that's that's just so unfortunate. So we'll never know because he didn't have any ability to. There was nothing in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a landmark to be had, and so you never know where he was.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, a lot of smart people have tried to figure that out.
Yeah,
They don't know for sure if he landed on Galveston or Matagorda.
Yeah, I've seen maps on the internet.
Yeah.
People saying, "Well, I think he went here. I think he went here."
Yeah.
I think some more recent accounts I think some people thought he might have gone around San Antonio, but I think some more recent with more evidence said probably stayed along the coast for a while. Didn't go near Austin or San Antonio. Then went into Mexico more. I forgot where they said.
He actually traveled through the Big Bend, amazingly enough, and went through Del Rio apparently, and went through the Big Bend down near Boquillas Canyon, or further west. I can't remember now, because some of those tribes that he encountered over there were well known, and their areas was well known, and the Spaniards knew who they were, and so when he got over there, they knew where it was. But when he was over here in the eastern half of Texas, nobody knew where anything was. There's another interesting account. Trying to remember who that was or when that was. There was it was about the time of La Salle. The Spanish sent some people looking for Fort St. Louis, which they eventually found, and they were worried about the French after that, and so they established a mission up there somewhere in that general area. And I forget now which one it was, but anyway, the priest that they had with them, he interviewed all of these tribes that were there, and it was in the fall of the year. The Karankawas would have a gathering down there on the southern part of Matagorda Island out there, and they would meet in October, and all of these various tribes would come and meet there, and the fishing was really good. Apparently they had some process that they were able to catch a huge number of fish.
Cool.
And so they would and it was linked to the fall tides and whatnot. Anyway, they would catch incredible numbers of fish, and so they could have this big gathering of people because they could feed them all. And all these other tribes would show up, and that's when people would, get married or find new mates or whatever. And all these tribes would socialize that they typically didn't socialize. And this Spaniard was recording all these tribes that were in the area. And of course, he didn't know that was going on at the coast. He just knew that where they were they were on this creek up there near Sinton, I think. But anyway, all these tribes were passing through, and he talked to them and tried to figure out how many people were in the tribe and what the name of the tribe was, and he recorded all that in the book. Well, nobody came back again for like 50 years or 70 years or something. And there were quite a number, and I don't remember what the number was, whether it was 6 or whether it was 16. I can't remember what the number was. But many of those tribes that he recorded, nobody's ever heard of them since. They completely disappeared in that time period. And of course, that's when more and more Europeans were coming into Texas and more Native Americans were being exposed to diseases and other problems related with that. And that's when tribes from the east started moving to the west because all the human population in the east pushed the Native Americans out. And that was when the turmoil was starting in a big way. But it's interesting that those tribes had been there, and then, like 40 or 60 years later, nobody ever heard of them again.
That's too bad.
So nobody knows for sure what to make of that, other than there was an awful lot of turmoil in the Native American population during that time.
Yeah, one thing I would love to do, but it's not possible, unfortunately, because of that. But one thing I would love to do would be able to talk to some Native Americans who lived along Cypress Creek and Spring Creek and find out about the ecological history of our area as kept by traditions. That would be freaking incredible. That would be interesting.
You made me think of do you know James Woodrick? He's an archaeologist, James Woodrick. If you don't know him, you need to talk to him. He'll talk to you.
Cool.
He's written a couple of books.
How do you spell his last name?
Anyway, one of his more recent books is Bernardo. He was kind of the head guy at this Bernardo archaeology dig out at Jared Gross's plantation out there, Huntsville. But Woodrick knows more about this part of the world back then than anybody. And he wrote a book. I'm trying to find the name of that book, which I've been having trouble finding copies, and I finally found some copies. I'll have some soon, and I'll give you one.
Oh, thanks. Cool.
He wrote a book called Elusive Dreams, Early Exploration and Colonization of the Upper Texas Coast. And it was published by the Liberty County Historical Commission. And I was having trouble finding it, and I called them, and it turns out they got a whole bunch of copies that they're trying to get rid of. So I'm going to go over there and get about 50 copies from them and pass them out or sell them or whatever. They're selling them for $10 a piece, but and that's how talking to him is how I found out about Billy Say and some of these other people that I've gone and read their accounts.
Wow.
And this, most of that collection of information is in that Elusive Dreams book. So, but he also did. He participated in there's a major archaeology site on Mound Creek, which is on near the Katy Prairie Conservancy property, and there's a archaeology site up there that's apparently was occupied for like 700 years. Various groups of people.
Wow, cool.
And he's done a lot of that excavation work, and he knows about that, and they know a lot about what animals they ate and what spear points they had, and they know a lot about those people. And so,
cool.
Some of that information is in this Elusive Dreams book also, I understand.
Cool, fascinating.
But I haven't got it ready yet, but I will soon.
Yeah. I got it on my list now.
The Historical Commission out there had their site shut down also because of COVID. And I talked to the lady the other day, and as soon as her schedule and my schedule match, we're going to go meet out there, and I'm going to get some books.
Oh, cool.
And,
sweet.
it's a, and although I haven't read it because of knowing him and what he's talked about and seeing a couple of his other books, he also wrote a book called Austin County. Anyway, because of all the research he's done and what I've seen, I'm sure it's a great book, and a lot of people would be interested in it if they just had a chance to look at it. They'd want to buy it. So I thought I'd help move those around, get some work I think needs a whole lot more publicity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one thing that's missing in our culture is just a knowledge of history, period. Digging into it and taking it seriously, not just, okay, yeah, you took like a Texas history course in like high school, but do you live it? Does it matter?
Yeah. Well, history's got a whole lot of interesting things about it, but one thing that's interesting is the way the human brain develops is after you get 50 years old, you start wanting to see how all the pieces fit. Mm-hmm. And it's not a function of you, it's a function of the aging of your brain.
Yeah.
And when you want to do that, all of a sudden you're interested in your family genealogy, you're interested in the history of the area, and all this stuff that you never paid any attention to before.
Yeah.
And so that's one problem, that you don't naturally develop an interest till you're 50. So what I think you need to do is kids need a story. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate. I grew up, and Davy Crockett was this wonderful hero, and so was William B. Travis and Jim Bowie, and they were all great heroes. And so you could learn these stories, and it was exciting, it was fun, and they were good guys. Well, nobody wants to do that now. Now they know that they're land speculators, or they were, they had all these human frailties, and they just want to focus on that. They don't want anybody to be a hero. And then they were taking advantage of all these poor, whoever. And so it ruins it. Mm-hmm. And then you look at a Texas history course that they teach today, and these kids have to cover all of Texas history, and, it's too much. It's just overwhelming, and so you don't learn anything cool about anything. They try and make you put these facts back. Well, that's not interesting. It's never going to get anybody interested in it.
True.
But if kids can focus on one story about a person or a thing or a place, they can get interested in that.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to really completely overhaul the way we look at history.
Agreed.
And then history's, history's too socially contrived, and everybody's trying to, mold these kids in their own image with whatever they teach them in school, instead of letting, history's history. What it is, it is. Mm-hmm. Kids need to learn that. Kids need to focus on something small before they can appreciate the big. They'll appreciate the big when they're 50. Right now, they need to get an interest that history does have something interesting that they want to look at.
Yeah.
That's, it's just like, if you can hold a bird in your hand and let a kid touch that bird, that does more for that kid than all the biology you can ever teach it about a bird.
Or putting
it connects it to life.
DNA.
It connects it to reality.
Yeah, it shouldn't be this stupid DNA stuff like, oh, you get these little G's on a piece of cardboard and put them next to little A's on a cardboard. It's like, that's not really learning about DNA anyway. I did that, and I didn't process it as learning DNA. It's just like doing stuff with your hands. It's like what you say is right. Biology's got to start with the birds and stuff you can care about. Yeah. I don't care about stupid letters.
If people don't learn to appreciate what's in front of them, if they don't appreciate a story about their family, if they don't appreciate the tree in their backyard, we're all lost.
Yeah, true.
So anyway, if I was king.
Yeah. if I was education czar, right? But so do you know some differences between what the area was like when Cabeza de Vaca was here versus when Belize was here?
Yes.
Like, how had the
Like how it's changed?
yeah, between them two, like 1719 and 1520, how did the
we don't know. We don't know that we can't tell from the information in those two books to compare any change between that time period.
Yeah.
They changed almost none between those two time periods. There was almost no change between 1520 and 1720. But between 1830 and 1850, the change was dramatic. What happened in 1520, Cabeza de Vaca was on the Texas coast, but he never saw a horse. And in 1720, there were horses everywhere. There were cattle everywhere. And that's what happened between Cabeza de Vaca and Belize, is that these domestic animals, the cattle and the horse, they proliferated. Now, but I don't recall Belize talking about herds of wild horses for sure. I have to look at that again. But the Native Americans were riding horses when Belize was here, and of course when Cabeza de Vaca was here, nobody had a horse because they hadn't been brought over until just about the same time that Cabeza de Vaca got here.
Have you read the book 1492?
Yes, 1491.
Okay, yeah, I think there's two, right? 1491 or 1492 or something like that.
Wait, there's 1491 and 1493.
Oh, that's what the two books are?
Yeah, I think that's the two books. Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, I've read that book.
Cool.
It's a great book.
Yeah.
I love the theory about the passenger pigeons in that book. I love the theory about all of these animals in that book. Yeah, the idea was that by the time Belize got here, there was an overabundance of game because there had been a decimation of the Native American populations. And that's quite possible, but because Cabeza de Vaca didn't record some of that information, we can't compare them. The two accounts are very uncomparable. Is the problem. Cabeza de Vaca was apparently south and west of here most of the time, and Belize was north and east of here most of the time. So they were in a different ecological zone to start with.
Cool.
But the fact of the matter is that there was, in 1720, there were a lot of buffalo on the upper Texas coast. And whether they were there in 1520, we really don't know.
Interesting.
So, but back to this horse herd thing. There were, when Jared Gross got to Bernardo and set up his plantation in 1820 over near Hempstead, like 1822, 21, I forgot which. The first year, of course, he didn't, they couldn't plant any crops, so he didn't have any crops. And he brought 90 slaves with him to Texas. And he fed those slaves horses. And they hunted horses out of this wild Mustang herd on the Katy Prairie. And that was primarily their source of survival for the first year that they were in Texas, by feeding on these horses. I don't understand why they fed on horses and not cattle, except that horses must have been more plentiful. But you wouldn't think they would be easier to tame than a cow, so I suspect that they were just more plentiful. And there were few, maybe there weren't very many cows at all at that point in time, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But at any rate, so we know for a fact that in 1820 there was this big herd of horses that sustained more than 100 people for an entire winter, or for an entire year, rather, not a winter, for an entire year, that they primarily fed these people horse meat all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, about 1900, in the Cypress area, it was primarily settled at that point in time by a bunch of Germans that had been settled earlier by typically non-German people. But there was a series of yellow fever incidents that virtually wiped Cypress off the map a couple of times. First in 1859 and then again in 1867. So that there was a complete turnover in the people that lived in the Cypress area after those two events. And after that second event, it was primarily Germans that settled in the Cypress area. And I've discovered 3 different families that their primary means of making a living were catching horses out of the wild horse herd on the Katy Prairie and breaking them and training them and selling them. 3 different families off of one horse herd.
Wow.
That apparently had been there for at least 100 years, if not 200 years.
Wow, interesting.
Taking care of themselves at Katy Prairie. Pretty amazing.
Yeah. But of course, there's none of them horses left that we know.
Pardon?
None of them horses left, of course.
No. They were all captured at one point or another. Horses are just too valuable to be roaming around. If nobody keeps you from taking them.
Yeah.
At least they were at one point in time. America was driven by horsepower. People forget that.
Yeah.
There was a I think it was in 1871 and 1872. There was a major horse plague that hit the United States, and it put out a commission or killed like 90% of the horses in the country, and it was especially hard on New York and Chicago and these urban centers that relied on transportation by horse-driven means. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, all these horses were out of commission. They couldn't hardly function. And that great equine plague, gone unrecorded in history almost, and it was such an interesting thing. Thank goodness for the automobile, internal combustion engine, that all this pollution that it caused in New York City. All these horses were pulling trolley cars and vegetable wagons and milk cartons, and everything was run by horses. Well, you know what horses produce?
Mm-hmm.
Horse manure.
Fertilizer.
What do you do with it in New York City?
Yeah.
There would be these vacant lots, and this horse manure would be several stories high in these vacant lots. And the flies were just unbearable, not to mention the smell in the summertime. Mm-hmm. And then in the winter, it would get packed with snow and ice, and it would freeze it, and it would, be there the next spring to start all over again.
Yeah.
People don't think about that.
Should have sold it
Pretty
out in the
amazing.
country. Yeah.
Yep.
In what year was the plague?
I think it was 1871 and 72. I'd have to try and go look it up again.
Huh.
I learned about it, and I wrote a story about it once. I used to write some articles for. I wrote a little history article every month for Cypress Lifestyle magazine, and I'd learned about that, and I wrote an article about that. And it eventually hit Texas also, but of course it didn't cause near as much trouble here as it did in cities in the east. because there was they were spaced out, and there was a lot more horses, and they were more spaced out, and the disease didn't transmit so completely so quickly. So it caused a lot of loss, but it wasn't a major crisis like it was in some of these eastern cities. Where that city just virtually came to a standstill because they couldn't move anymore.
I guess they could have, if they would have followed the lead of the Egyptian pharaohs, they could have had groups of 100 people hauling things, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what they ended up having to do. They had all of a sudden, but some stuff you just can't do that with very easily. You know, it's hard to.
Yeah.
You're set up for one horse to do something, all of a sudden you need to get 10 guys to do it. Kind of tough.
Yeah. Especially if they don't know they need the exercise.
Yeah.
Well, let me see. I'd like to continue, but my cat is hungry and telling me I need to stop, and he's going to be meowing up a storm if I don't take care of him.
But just, excuse me, just meant something. My hearing aid's acting up.
Cool.
Okay. Sorry.
Cool. All good. So, yeah, maybe if we could wrap up here and maybe talk again about some more of the history of Kleb and early history of the area and settling. If you got time, that'd be cool. But
well, the Kleb family acquired this property in 1871. Elmer's grandfather, Andreas Kleb, had immigrated with his father, Conrad Kleb, from Germany in 1846. And his father was part of the Adelbaron that was the Society for the Protection of German Immigrants to Texas. And Soms Bronsel was the guy that was one of the German noblemen that helped create that society. And Germany was on the brink of civil war, and they had too much population and no opportunity for the next generation. And the tradition and laws said that the oldest son inherited whatever the father had, business or farm. And so if you were the second or third or fourth son or the daughter or whatever, you had really no potential future, and there were so many people there that everybody had bought everything and nobody turned loose anything, because if they turned loose anything, they couldn't buy anything. And so it was a major problem that all these 26 different city-states, independent republics in Germany, or independent monarchies, were facing. And so they had cut a deal with the Republic of Texas to form a colony in Texas. But in the meantime, before they could execute all that, Texas joined the Union, and so they had to wait and find out if Texas was going to be able to have this land to grant to Germany. And eventually that was all settled, and Texas was going to retain their lands. And so the thing started up again. And in 1846, Germans started immigrating in huge numbers. And the first 6,000 of them assembled at Indianola. And they formed a wagon train, and they were headed to Fredericksburg, which is where the grant was. But 6,000 of them started, and only 1,400 of them survived to make it to New Braunfels, and that's as far as they got. So Soms Bronsel had to scramble and figure out whose land this was that his people had stopped on, and they wouldn't go any further and purchase it so that they could settle there permanently. And that's how New Braunfels came about.
So,
well, Conrad Kleb was
4,500 of them died, or what?
Yes. 4,600 of original 6,000 died on the way there.
Like
They either
disease
died
or
on
what?
the coast of malaria or cholera and all sorts of various diseases. They came to Texas. They were from Germany. The heat just absolutely killed them in a lot of cases. You know, a lot of them were well educated. They were craftsmen or some station in life other than, you know, a labor that could survive these trials and tribulations of the trail. And for all these various reasons, they just dropped like flies. Well, Conrad Kleb had signed up with the same deal, but he came and landed in October of 46, and he landed in Galveston. Well, he sailed with 4 boys, 2 daughters, and a pregnant wife. And when he got, or wait a minute, that's not right, 4 boys, a girl, and a pregnant wife. Either right before, or he lost his daughter on the crossing somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean.
Wow.
And either right before or right after he arrived at Galveston, his wife died along with his infant daughter. So all of a sudden he was in Galveston, October of 1846. He had lost his wife, his daughter, and he was widowed with 4 boys. And then he comes to find out that the group of people that left to go where he was headed, they almost all died on the way. So he stayed in Galveston for 2 years. And he worked there, and the 4 boys got along. And then he eventually came up here, and he settled about a mile from Kleb Woods. And he lived there the rest of his life. He married another lady named Elizabeth Glass, and he ended up having like 8 more children. He had a total of 14 children in his life.
Wow.
But anyway, so he died, and the boys took the proceeds from his farm, and Andreas and his next closest brother, the 2 older brothers were Philip and Anderson. I never can remember which one's older than the other one. Anyway, those 2 boys purchased 320 acres, which included this 100 acres that's in the Kleb Preserve today. And then in 1873, they divided it, and Andreas apparently got more than half of it. But anyway, and then in 1904, one of his sons, Ed Kleb, inherited 100 acres out of that original park that he had. And then a couple of years later, Ed bought this 30-acre tract that goes up to 2920. And so Ed Kleb, by 1904, had assembled this 130 acres. It's Kleb Preserve today. And Elmer was born in 1907. He had a sister that was born in 1913, but she died young and never had any children. And Elmer never married and had any children. And so he was the sole surviving heir, and he inherited this 130 acres.
Interesting.
So that's how the Klebs came to be here in Texas.
Interesting. Thanks. We'll go ahead and wrap it up here if we could. My brain needs some coffee, and my cat needs some food. So,
I hear that.
So,
well, I enjoyed it. I hope people will come and visit our park at some point or other, and either Kleb Woods Nature Preserve out here on our address is 20303 Draper Road. And then the historic park is Cypress Top Historic Park, and it's 26026 Hempstead Highway, but it's the old highway. And if you're looking for it and driving up and down at Cypress trying to figure out where this address is, well, we're behind the Lowe's on the old highway.
Okay.
But if you Google Cypress Top Historic Park, it'll come right up and get you there, no problem.
And I'll put some links in the show notes for folks. They can look it up there.
Great.
Cool.
Well, we'd love to have them come out. I think we have a lot to share with people, and I think they'll enjoy their time out here.
Yeah.
Kleb is particularly, it's pretty quiet. We have a lot of walkers that come out here and just enjoy the solitude and the scenery, and it's a very popular park.
Cool. Nice. Yeah, I recommend it. Nice place. All right. Any last words, Fred?
Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
You have a good day.
All right.
Thanks.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.